Well, welcome to this webinar. We're thankful that you have taken the time to join us. My name is Cindy Quinlan. I'm an educational consultant with Abeka, and today we're going to hear from Micah Conlon and Amy Yohe, and they're going to be talking about some ideas, some strategies, some best practices of how to finish this school year successfully, especially with how we all find ourselves working with remote learning, something we didn't anticipate even just a month or month and a half ago. So before I give you guys an opportunity to share what you've gathered together, let me go ahead and introduce you. Micah Conlon has worked as a teacher for nearly 20 years. He's taught high school math and high school science. He's also served as an administrator for several years, and then even worked with some accreditation teams where you have helped other Christian schools meet and maintain their accreditation standards. And now he works with Abeka as one of our curriculum writers, as one of our curriculum designers for high school math and science. Amy Yohe is our managing editor for Abeka, but she has also spent several years as an elementary teacher, an elementary principal, and then even a high school principal. And so now she works with her team in creating resources for students, for parents, for teachers around the world. And so I'm going to let you guys help us out with, now that we are looking at finishing this school year, probably not being able to gather together, what are some things we can do to still end strong?
You know, the webinar that we did for Abeka several weeks ago seems like a lifetime ago. It seems like yesterday, all at the same time. We were right on the front end of this journey and sharing ideas for best practice to get started as we transitioned into a remote environment. And now here we are, several weeks into it and several weeks out from the end of it. So I think it's a great time to jump back in, rehearse some of those things that we shared before, and share what we've all learned in the time since then. I was conversing with an administrator friend who shared this quote with me. It was a great reminder, I thought, of what we're trying to accomplish. With every decision that we make, we've got to communicate those things with care and with concern. I think the quote's been attributed to Theodore Roosevelt and probably several others as well. People do not know how much you know, or do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. So thank you, Matthew and Fort Pierce, for reminding me of that, because even as we make data-driven decisions, they've also got to be very much customer-focused and communicated in such a way that we continue to share that care and concern that's obviously a part of the ministry aspect of what we do as Christian school administrators every day. So Micah, should we start off with Instruction Continuity Plan?
Okay, great.
Jump right in. I mean, that's where we started several weeks ago with how do we make this transition into a remote learning environment?
Yeah, we certainly want to maintain the plan that we've enacted already, and we want to build in that process as well. We want to develop the trust as well from parents and our entire constituency. So there's a lot of things that we are interested in covering today, and hopefully it will be a benefit to those joining us today. We want to focus right now at home instruction. What's a reasonable expectation? Now, that's a fair question. A lot of parents are putting on a hat that they haven't normally had to put on, and they've had to experience a lot of transition themselves. So we're wanting to think about that today as we look into that continuity plan. Maybe we can focus on what's important to academic success. I think this is very important. Teachers are wondering what they need to be presenting. Parents are wondering, what is my child going to be prepared for the next year? So we want to think about that as we focus on some of that academic success. A lot of schools are incorporating drive-throughs still. Teachers are getting all the materials together for 1 or 2 weeks at a time, and they're providing that material for them. That's proven very beneficial from many of the contexts that I've been able to get a hold of. And a lot of the instruction has gone to technology-based, and that's been a brand new adventure for many people, I am sure. So they're using formats and platforms. Zoom's been very popular. Google Classroom's been popular. Some of the elementary platforms, Class Dojo is one of those. There's a lot of things out there that teachers are using for that instruction, and obviously that gives them direct access to that home as well. So a lot of things going on.
So we've gotten creative and used all kinds of different resources. I know many of the schools that Abeka has the opportunity to partner with are utilizing the ProTeach videos, but again, using it in their own way. So they may be starting out with the teacher giving the introduction to the day by video or by Zoom, and then switching to the students watching the Abeka Pro Teach videos. And again, adjusting expectations. I think teachers need to communicate. You don't have to do every problem that the video teacher assigns. If you're able to trim that back and keep it more realistic in that at-home setting, I think that's amazing. I heard former Secretary of Education Bill Bennett in the Fox News town hall this week say that 55 million students in the states have transitioned to at-home instruction. So we're all going through it, but we all have slight nuances that are different, and that's good. There's not one best practice in all of this, is there? There's multiple options, and we've got to do, like you said earlier, Micah, what works for those that we're serving in our community.
I would certainly recommend to the administrators out there, you certainly want to find what works for your school. You do not want to be jumping back and forth through digital platforms. That can be very confusing, and it can be even more stressful for the teachers to have to adjust to that. So you may have a school management system that works for you, and you're able to give assessments through that. You may use some of the platforms that we mentioned today, but there's a lot of things out there, but you certainly want to find what works for you and stick with that through this whole process.
And that's one of the highlights that I've been hearing as I've talked with teachers, or as I've done a lot of reading, just as you have, even in the last couple of weeks. What are some of the best practices for remote learning? But really, as we see here, with reasonable expectations, looking at the basics, there might be things that we normally would have done as teachers with our students in the classroom, but we may have to push those to the side for now and focus on those basics and not feel guilty for not being able to do what we would normally do. And then I think, as you said, that creativity, though, trying to keep things as normal as possible in the way we deliver those, or in some of the recordings that teachers will give to their students, and keeping some of those procedures as much as possible for them at home seems to help with this movement.
I just had this thought. We've all been emphasizing in our classrooms this year the importance of critical thinking for our students, and I feel like that's all we've done for the last several weeks ourselves, is had to think critically, to take the information that we have, do that good problem solution thinking. And so if you're feeling a little bit exhausted, it's probably because
Thinking
of the group we've been in
Thinking is work.
for a while. Yeah. So let's transition to talking about continuing a high level of teacher to student communication. We've really already touched on that, and we're going to spend a whole nother webinar on that. So we're only going to briefly touch on it today, but we've got to have that constant communication. Maybe I should say consistent communication with our students. They're missing their teacher. They are seeing their teacher on video, they're hearing their voice, perhaps they're watching the Pro Teach videos, but they're missing that face-to-face interaction. So we need to create those opportunities to touch base with our students. We need to encourage our students. We need to try to informally assess our students, and we can ask questions. We can have the younger ones read to us over the phone. We can interact in meaningful ways that'll give us an idea of how students are doing with at-home learning. So we need to be assessing. We've got reluctant learners, and if they struggled in the classroom, they are likely struggling even more now when the setting and the structure has been lost to some degree. And so we're going to have to spend some extra time with those students, just as we would have spent some time with them perhaps after school in the classroom, making sure their needs, their unique needs, are met as well. I am loving all of the opportunities to see teachers interacting with students. Some have posted it on social media and such. And we brought a video clip today. We're actually going to show a little bit of it here in the webinar and then post the entirety of the clip for you on the webinar website of a teacher interacting with a child. So let's jump into Miss Howe's classroom and her Zoom classroom and see a little bit of what she's doing with first grader Braden.
Excited about starting animals in the great outdoors tomorrow? I'm going to get you here. You read for that on Friday. Now, are you ready to get busy though? Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you some things on your screen, and I want you to tell me the words that you see. First of all, I want you to look on the left-hand side of your screen, and I want you to match the left-hand side to the right-hand side to give me a compound word. Ready? That's a good one. Give me another one that starts with snow. Hive is one, but do you see another one that starts with snow? We could have snowball and snowflake. Do you see flake on the right hand side? That would be a good compound word.
And then we can also skip ahead to see how she's been able to use visuals.
Right. I see on the left-hand side there where she started out using this more so as like a PowerPoint, just as she would have done in her classroom to ask him questions and meet his unique needs, as he was giving some answers along the way that weren't exactly what she was looking for. But I see a little bit farther down where she's created a slide that looks a lot like an Abeka visual that she would have used in her classroom, that combination dot card. Let's see what she does with that. Maybe right after that, so we're really super close.
All right, we'll go. Now, I want you to help me with this combination dot card. Give me 2 addition and 2 subtraction back.
12 minus 4 equals 8. 12 minus 8 equals 4. 4 plus 8 equals 12. 8 plus 4 equals 12.
Absolutely fantastic. And now we're ready to do a little bit of arithmetic basketball. First off, start by telling me the rules
So,
of the game.
Cindy, I loved how she took that dot card, and just as she would have used that in the classroom, she created that same conversation with him over Zoom. And that got us thinking here at Abeka, how can we support teachers in creating these types of presentations? Teachers are likely doing it already, but there may be an extra step that we want them to take here as we continue remote learning through the end of the year in many states, and have our teachers do some sort of end of year assessment that they can do in this platform. And so what we did is pulled our team together the last couple of days and created over 300 of our elementary visuals in a digital format. And so those are going to be available on our webinar website, and we can show you kind of how that screen is going to look so that you can navigate these resources. There'll be drop-down menus for each grade level, K4 through 6th grade, different subjects represented. We reached out to a few teachers and said, help us pick the visuals that you would find most useful in a digital format to finish the school year successfully. You'll see an example of one here on the next image that we'll show. So a teacher could pop up that calculator image in Zoom, use her pointer to point to and do some oral combinations just as she would have done in the classroom, and assess students' basic knowledge. So we hope teachers will enjoy accessing those over 300 images that have been made available on the
And
website.
that keeps some of that continuity through it. These are the same images that many of the students have or were using in the classroom, and now they can see their teacher use it as she speaks to them too.
I love that idea. Makes all the sense in the world.
Another opportunity teachers have had is to increase their interaction with parents through these digital platforms. I think that's a very important factor when it comes to remote learning. Teachers are very engaged in that educational process, and now parents are also highly engaged in the process. So using those platforms not only to instruct students, but also to inform parents of what's going on, I think is a great opportunity for teachers to take in order to increase that communication level with the parent. I think we all understand the importance of the emphasizing of a remote learning process. This is not a homeschooling situation. Although the education is taking place at home, it's certainly much different than what normally takes place in a homeschool.
I heard a psychologist, I believe it was, on the Fox News Town Hall this week reference, it's not homeschooling because these parents weren't called to homeschool. They found themselves in the situation. She called it home surviving. I'd like to think with all the innovation that we've used, we found the opportunity for home thriving in this online environment for this time, which we hope will be brief. You know, there's a third element for us to touch on, and I know we've got to move on to other things, but it's that element of enjoyment. And I think we've touched on it already. These points are all woven together, but we've just got to make sure that we're engaging students in a way that's meaningful to them. Free resources abound. I think we've all seen virtual tours that different companies are doing. I mean, different museums and such have had to close themselves, but they've created those 360-degree tours and such that we can use with our students. You mentioned a zoo cam.
Yes.
That a family was watching.
Yeah, a school in Wilmington mentioned this. They encouraged elementary students to watch a webcam, 24/7 webcam at a zoo. And they decided to look at the camera that was over the tiger exhibit. And the tiger had just had cubs apparently, and they were so excited about watching what's going to happen with the cubs. And so excited, in fact, that the parents ended up putting it on their TV in their living room and streamed the entire event for the entire weekend because they were all so eager to see what was going to take place. those are also opportunities to introduce STEM projects and ideas of just observing things in nature and taking resources that are available online and doing something that you probably wouldn't be able to do in the classroom, but now in this new setting, you have the opportunity to do that. I think the most important component with the element of enjoyment is just it continues that sense of community. Students are being isolated in a way that they probably haven't been experienced before. So developing a sense of community in your school and in that transcending the campus itself and going into this online learning platform, I think is essential. It's very important to continue that.
They're missing each other, aren't they? So if we can bring elements like spirit days that we might have done here in the spring anyway and do that in the virtual environment, we may have the opportunity to celebrate birthdays. Teachers have come up with creative ways to celebrate classroom birthdays. Teachers have hosted Zoom parties. It was the most hysterical thing I've ever watched for my 4-year-old to participate in a Zoom party the other day with 2 of his teachers and all of the boys in the class. Trying to connect with each other all at the same time was just completely entertaining for this mom. I talked to Monty in Louisville, and he said he's got an idea of wanting to launch a service project of some sort that could be done from home. So I love the idea of community and how we can still bring those ideas in to keep things as normal as possible, even though they're anything but normal at this point. There's resources, again, available to you to do things that you would have never been able to do in the classroom. 2nd grade teachers are about to start the very last reader of the year. It's called My New Name. And you would never have the opportunity to bring the author of that book into the classroom to kick off the reading of that book. But because of everything that we're doing virtually, we can do that. And so just like Ms. Howe's video earlier, which is in its entirety on the webinar webpage, we have a second resource that 2nd grade teachers might want to use where we've recorded the author introducing her book, My New Name. So we'll show you just a little bit of that.
Hello everyone, I am Bethany Roberts-Carbina, and as far back as I can remember, I have always loved making up stories. I can remember so many times dragging my brothers outside to the play set or the trampoline to pretend we were scientists, doctors, sailors, you name it. Other times, I even wrote short plays and made my cousins perform them for our friends and family. Well, I am a little bit older these days. I am married now, and I have my own a little boy named Leo who goes to live in a children's home called the Merritt House. And during his time at the Merritt House, something happens there that changes his life and his name forever. I'm going to read a little bit of the first chapter to give you an idea of what happens in this book. But we're going to skip ahead and start on page 5. When the door was closed, Miss Lucy clapped her hands and asked, "Well now, Leo, would you like me to show you around?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. Miss Lucy's eyes became soft, and she turned to lead the way. They walked down the entryway into a wide dining hall. Leo took it all in. There were almost 50 chairs, maybe more. Leo thought, there must be a lot of kids here. He must have said it out loud because Miss Lucy said, "There are many kids your age. I'm sure they will be happy to meet you."
And as Amy had said, that whole video there is on the Christian School Resources page that we've created. And so 2nd grade teachers can share this with their students at home, that they can hear the author of the book they're about to read and just get that connection. And I think both of you have stressed that point. There's a lot we cannot do that we would have been able to do with our students in the classroom that we cannot do when they're at home. But there's a lot that we can do with them at home that we probably wouldn't have been able to. So of course, balancing that, but also appreciating the opportunities that we do have. So those are some general points for keeping the instruction, that continuity going. And I think you mentioned we're going to explore further communicating with parents and communicating with students in a webinar next week. And that webinar for, I believe, next Thursday is even available for you to sign up for if you'd already be interested in it. So we'll be able to get a lot more details. But with instruction, though, there's another part of instruction, and that is assessment. So what are some ideas you have for the assessment that needs to happen now that students are also at home?
Well, Cindy, assessment is an essential component to the educational process. And in fact, it's become a very important component now, even more so that students are learning remotely. An interesting statistic that UNESCO put out a couple of weeks ago is they approximate that 90% of the world's population of students that are enrolled, learners that are enrolled, have been impacted by the coronavirus. So it's not just a single school or a state or even a country. We all know that this is a worldwide issue, but it's an issue that educators worldwide have to address. And when we're thinking about assessments, there's probably a couple of general expectations that are out there. We should focus on what's important at this point. What's important for academic success? We all have vigorous assessment processes that we follow, but we're going to have to narrow that down to what actually is important. And this is also where communication is vitally important, not just for the parent to the teacher, but also from the teacher to the teacher. If I had a fourth grade, if my fourth grade, I have a couple of kids, I have 3 children. One is in the 5th grade, so I'll use her as an example. I would hope that the 6th grade teacher is talking to the 5th grade teacher and letting them know what's going to be expected those first couple of weeks of school. That will certainly increase the focus when it comes to determining what academics needs to be assessed, and then continue to adjust as warranted. This is a very fluid situation, as we all understand. So trying to figure out, again, what assessments are working beneficially for your students. Also, what assessments are the parents able to proctor and to present in a way that still obtains that assessment component that we're looking for. And then I think, Amy, you can talk about some assessment tools that...
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about, to your point, Michael, we don't have to necessarily use every assessment that the curriculum called for that we would have used in our classroom. Cindy, you're a high school English teacher. So I think about those English teachers who had lit quizzes and grammar quizzes and VSP quizzes every single week. Perhaps we can alter those, combine them into a single quiz, put it into an online platform perhaps, and do a few grammar questions, a few lit questions, a couple VSP questions to limit the frequency of assessment, but still be able to get that feedback and that assurance that students are viewing the instruction, they're completing their assignments, all of those of which are for the purpose of gaining the knowledge, the foundational knowledge that they're going to need to be successful in the next school year. I thought that was such a great point, to get teachers talking to each other. What's most important? What do I need to spend the most time on in the remaining time that we have, and as far as assessment is concerned? So many of you are using online assessment options. You've switched over to Google Classroom and the assessment option that's there, or like Ms. Howe, you're doing it more informally over Zoom or over the phone to get feedback on how students are doing. Mikey, when you and I were talking the other day, we talked about speeches and how a speech class obviously offers an opportunity for a student to record their speech and to upload it to their teacher through a platform, through an LMS, perhaps that the schools are already using. But perhaps we need to broaden that and not just think about it in areas that seem obvious like speech, but other areas where students could do a recording that demonstrates their knowledge. Perhaps we give them very basic guidelines of what to include and let them get creative in how they demonstrate to us what they're learning in the classroom. When I was talking to an administrator the other day, they asked, is a project-based assessment, does that sound like we're moving away from traditional practices into more progressive practices? And I don't think so. I don't think it has to be. It's not like you're assessing the group and how they are, working together. You're still giving an individual assessment, but hey, students love technology. They're better at it than we are. So let them put together their own PowerPoint presentation. Let them initiate some sort of a Zoom or another platform presentation to, again, through perhaps a project, be able to demonstrate the learning that they're going to walk away from that grade level with. I think there's a lot of variety.
And often one of the concerns with project-based is sometimes it pushes out literacy, but students have been writing, they've been doing their normal classwork all year. And so now is a time where they can build on what they've learned to do some more creative elements, like you were talking
It could be
about.
as simple in elementary as write me a letter.
Yes.
And tell me what you've learned this week. And then you're incorporating so many different skills, and they just think they're having fun writing their teacher a letter, but there's a lot of opportunity to assess there. So I think we can still be creative.
No, certainly. We forget that the students who are in school this year, they have those exposure to projects already. They know most of them can write a paper or write an essay. So they're already aware of the procedure and protocol that you may have at your school. So I think it's important for us to explore those. I mean, I know of some foreign language teachers that are using just recording, having their students record their vocabulary pronunciation. I've been aware of book reports and presentations being presented on Adobe Spark Video. It's something very simple that the students can download for free, and it's almost like imagine a PowerPoint with them speaking over it, and it creates a video file that can be shared. So it's a wonderful opportunity to present material back to the teacher and really help the teacher assess if that student has really comprehended that material that's been covered. So project-based assessments can be very good. It would be much more challenging if school started off this way. If 3 weeks in the school year, everything happened that has transpired. But again, the students are aware of some of the things that teachers have already expected throughout the course of at least the first 3 quarters of the year. So certainly. And then another concern is integrity of home assessments. I mean, how can we really trust what's being assessed at home? Is it reliable? That's a very, it's a major concern for a lot of educators. We all know that students are more tech savvy than we are. We all know that they're probably not all taking their assessments exactly at the same time. So we have to be very creative in our approach to assessments. And that's where project-based can really come into play. It also allows the ability to provide education and obtain knowledge far beyond your lower levels of learning. Project-based learning can reach that, evaluate, and even the creative component of Bloom's taxonomy that we struggle so hard to implement into the classroom. So we have opportunity. We just have to take that opportunity.
The ingenuity that has come in for all of us, I think it's important to push that down to the students, because we've got to think about those life skills. We talk about, and we'll talk about in a minute, goals and objectives of a course, but let's just think of goals and objectives of education in general. If we can teach students this problem solution, this skill, give them an idea of how to submit evidence of their learning to us and see what they come up with would be really interesting.
Certainly.
And that reminds me, the teacher's attitude. We know that what students get most from their teacher is not usually the academic content, but the teacher's testimony, the character she models. So teachers have a neat opportunity, parents as well, to show students when you're all of a sudden thrust into a difficult time, what's the best way to handle it. And so we see so many teachers handling it with grace, with cheerfulness, and that's just a wonderful testimony. That is something else they're teaching their students that they might not have had the same opportunity to do so in the classroom.
If the school has gone through the accreditation process, they actually have quite an advantage because they've already gone through the curriculum mapping process, most of them. They've also, the goals and objectives that you mentioned, they've even become more focused, and they call them core competency objectives. So many of the schools have already determined what those are going to be for their school. So those can certainly be helpful in determining what assessments to use, what can we remove, what needs to be emphasized. So those can certainly, they're no longer just stored away on the shelf. Now they actually can be put into use when it comes to validating your assessments.
So we focused a lot on what teachers should be doing with their students, but we're taking it up a little bit of a notch now. We're speaking to a lot of administrators and saying, okay, administrators, here's some expectations you can set for your teachers. Have your teachers demonstrate back to you what they're doing to ensure that those core competencies are being achieved as we wrap up the school year.
So communication, it keeps coming up. Communication with students, communication with parents, communication within the school too.
It seems that we're getting several questions, and thank you for putting those questions in for us about accessing ProTeach and what that's all about. Some of you may not be familiar with it. If you need help getting that set up or more information, you can simply reach out to us at schools@abeka.com, and we'd love to help you with that. It's me as an administrator, I would always use that if I needed some remedial work for students, or if I needed had a substitute that I needed, I could actually use that, those videos to help with that. So if you need help with that, we certainly want to help you in order to implement ProTeach as you can.
And if you're not familiar with those at all, just in a nutshell, that is pre-recorded instruction for every single lesson covered in Abeka's complete product line, of course, across every subject and every grade level that teachers can utilize, especially as we get to the end of the year. Teachers are going to get busy. You remember what May is like at school. It's not going to be all that different as far as the level of busyness. Teachers are going to need to do all kinds of different things to wrap up the school year. So maybe the teacher's been recording instruction up to this point. Maybe now the teacher would like to supplement with somebody else doing a little bit of instruction while they, gather materials, average grades, whatever needs to be done. So if you're not familiar with ProTeach, reach out. That email address, schools@abeka.com, and let us help.
It's already helped many teachers. We're appreciating the feedback we've gotten about that. So it may also be a means of helping you meet your students' needs. Now, we're talking about assessments, but also big on everyone's mind. Like you said, it's May, things are busy. One of the reasons May is so busy is because we're getting to final grades. We're transitioning students from one grade to another. We're looking at final exams. What are some suggestions you have about those final grades for students with everything that has happened?
So we've already said that to a large degree, integrity may have been lost with the assessments that we've been having to do at home because, as you referenced, Micah, we don't have control over the consistency of the environment that those assessments are taken in. So these fourth quarter grades are a little fuzzier than the rest of the year as far as being a direct measurement of how students would have performed in the classroom. So we've got to think about those final exams. And do final exams need to look the same way that they did? You mentioned core competency. So maybe there's fewer questions that we hit some basic foundational important things that we need to measure for students to be able to progress into the next grade level. Obviously, depending on the situation of whether you've been using online assessments or paper assessments, we've got to figure out how to pull all that back together, get what we need to back into the school so that we can properly document what's gone on during the fourth quarter. Micah, what about averaging grades here at the end of the semester or at the end of the year?
That seems to be a very hot topic. I would recommend for the administrators joining us today, I would really defer to a lot of the state requirements and also reach out to some of the various accreditation agencies. They have really done a great job trying to get legislation through in order to try to finalize what needs to be done. It would be simple for something to come from the White House per se that would say, okay, everybody has to do it this way. The only problem with that is every state is different. You have some states that are suffering dramatically from the coronavirus, and then you have states in the Midwest that only have a few hundred cases. So a blanket policy would be a very difficult thing to implement fairly. So I think every school has to determine what's best for them. I can tell you what a lot of schools are doing, and maybe that'll give you some information to kind of help decide what you want to do. Some schools are not allowing the GPA to be impacted at all with the last 9-week quarter. Some schools are, it's a pass or fail situation. I did find that a lot of elementary through 8th grade schools are doing that. There's not all, and we would never want our students or parents to necessarily know that it's the academics of that is to prepare them for high school. Now, but when they get to high school, that's really where the question comes in. What do we do? I've been thinking about this quite a bit. What would I do if I were in this type of situation? I would try to err on the side of caution, but understand that the plan I create may not be what actually is implemented to its full capacity. What I mean by that is, I think it's imperative that all the numerical averages need to be recorded. Now you can adjust what they count toward. Do they count toward the GPA, or do they count toward valedictorian, salutatorian, or other academic awards that your school may give? That is up to the individual school. What would work best for your constituency? So I think a lot of those questions do have solutions, but they're going to be individual. I'd also encourage administrators to make sure your state legislation is coming up with information about achievement tests. As Christian schools, most of us are required or mandated by law to give a certain number of achievement tests, at least in terms of grade level. Well, this is going to cause some severe issues with that because not everyone was able to get achievement tests in this year. Also, I know with states like North Carolina, for instance, that give scholarships through the state or a voucher system. A lot of those are linked to achievement test results as well. So administrators of states like that certainly need to pay close attention to what's going on in their local government, because that certainly can have a drastic impact. The key to all of that is documenting whatever your decision is. I would encourage all of you to document your decision and include a official school letter that mentions the decision, and include that in all of the students' cumulative folders. That's imperative because the decisions we're making today are going to impact the freshmen that we have today. 3 years from now, when they're applying to colleges, these scores that we're saying or we're trying to develop or policies we're trying to develop are going to impact them. So it's far-reaching. It's not just this year, these seniors that we're trying to help. It's going to impact several students.
So you're envisioning on the transcript perhaps an asterisk beside
Yes.
the 2019-2020 school year, just because we hope this is far past us
Right.
soon, but the impact is long-lasting.
Well, and don't fret, because everyone's having to make these choices. Again, remember my stat, 90% of the world's learners have been affected by this. So don't think it's just your school, it's everyone. So developing that and documenting your policy is going to be very important for not just this year, but for the years to come.
So I like how that accreditation team experience is coming in. Documentation is so key. Yet again, communication and having that not only for this year, but for the years to come will be an encouragement. So with final grades, the other big question in people's minds, of course, is also going to be graduation.
Mm-hmm.
What are some ideas? There's a lot of students that have been looking forward for months and even years to graduation, and they're facing some keen disappointment. How can we help them with that?
I think again, this is going to vary from school to school, isn't it? And it's going to vary from state to state. Some states aren't closed. They may be able to still have a graduation ceremony, where others, it's just not going to be possible to do that in person. So I think, again, there's going to have to be general considerations in regard to social distancing guidelines. Micah, you mentioned when we were talking the other day, you got to seek your stakeholder input. You got to pull a committee together.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity for administrators to build that communication component once again by increasing the information from stakeholders. I would develop a somewhat of a steering committee, and it would include parents of seniors, it would include faculty, it would even include seniors. Get some of the student council involved if your school has a student council. Getting that input will help you develop a plan, and hopefully multiple plans. I would recommend that you have at least 3 plans when it comes to graduation. That's what most schools are doing. They're considering what happens if we could graduate the actual graduation date. And then some are thinking, well, we could push graduation out until the middle of summer possibly, or even the beginning of August. And then the furthest reaching one that I was made aware of is December. Some schools are thinking, hey, we could plan for graduation during December. And that may seem like a non-realistic possibility, but when you think about it, the seniors that are graduating from your school now, they would have a Christmas break during that December time. And that would be a great time for them to come back as alumni and also as graduates too. So it's just, there's lots of things that are out there. A lot of people are trying to figure out what works best for them. But again, it's contingent on your local requirements and even how well your school is faring when it comes to this pandemic.
Do you think this is the single decision that these administrators are going to make with the biggest emotional impact to the school year?
Oh, there's no doubt. All you have to do is look at social media to see how this is impacting seniors across the United States. There's so many that are wanting to reach that finalizing component to high school. And for them to not know what's going to happen, it's very difficult for them, and they don't know what to do.
So we can make it special. It's not going to be the same.
Right.
But
Certainly.
we can make it special. And we've talked a lot about seniors, but we got to remember those little kindergartners too, don't we? Because they've been eagerly, at least their parents have been eagerly anticipating kindergarten graduation. And for some, they've got pictures of every one of their kindergartners graduating, and this is the last one. How can I not have a memory there? So as we're thinking about our seniors, I think we also have to make sure there's an element of thinking about our kindergartners as well, making sure that we're meeting their needs. And you know what? There's pop-up companies all over the place that have popped up to help support graduation graduation ceremonies in a virtual setting. So there's options out there, whether you want to create something unique to your school specifically, or you want to use one of these pop-up companies that'll brand it for your school. And then with high schoolers, we've been seeing things, like you said, Micah, all over social media. I saw yard signs that schools had put out in a particular setting. I've seen social media campaigns where they featured a senior of the day on their school's social media offerings. I saw just this morning here locally a city that is putting up banners on the light poles around the city, just congratulating the class of 2020. So a sense of community there. I also saw a county that was doing a county-wide Adopt a Senior and suggesting that folks within the community pick a senior and write them a note of encouragement, maybe send them a small gift, something to just show these graduates love in really unique ways in these unique times.
In fact, a great idea would be if your school is associated with a church of some kind, to get your church members to adopt a senior and to help them be an encouragement to the graduates of 2020. Another issue that has been brought up is awards. What are we going to do with awards? It's such an important time. Schools are coming up with some interesting ideas. Mailing would be probably not the best idea just because of the expense. But some people are thinking about developing a drive-through, similar to what they're doing with their the curriculum and the assessments that they're giving out on a weekly basis. Maybe they could do a drive-through. The administrator could even do almost like a mock live stream event. You'd be surprised what it would do to a grandparent to hear their child's name just spoken over a live streaming opportunity. So there's several things that can be done out there. It's just a matter of, again, focusing on what works best for you. There's no perfect solution to this type of situation. So lots of ideas.
Just do what's meaningful.
So
right?
we're looking at the K-5. And I know for a lot of people, K-5 is a great time also to market their school because those little kindergartners can do a lot more at the end of the school year than a lot of people realize. And so that's an opportunity, like you said, if you video it and put it on some platform to show, there may be others that wouldn't normally watch that can see the product that your school is developing. So K-5, 12th grade, what about all the people in between? I know there are different things that 9th graders and 6th graders and 5th graders would normally have at the end of the year that they're not going to have.
You're right. So those celebratory closing assemblies, awards presentations. This may be a year that everybody gets an award, Micah, because we've all survived this remote learning setting. But we can create even Zoom opportunities or some other virtual way to have those kind of end of year award ceremonies. And boy, wouldn't that be a neat time just to collect testimonies? We've heard so many sweet stories, memories that parents have now of the time that they've spent with children that was completely unexpected and in a lot of senses undesired. None of us were looking forward to working remotely and trying to homeschool or school at home our children at the same time. And so to be able to collect video testimonies and share those with each other is just going to document this year in a way that goes beyond a printed yearbook. For sure.
Certainly.
Now, we've looked at instruction, assessment, grades, even getting to the end of the quarter. Just to wrap things up, what are some of the things you might quickly mention just for our principals, our teachers to keep in mind?
You know, there's other topics, and I think several of these are going to be covered in future webinars, but we've mentioned several times already, stay informed of regulations and recommendations, everything from academic expectations to just CDC guidelines. We've got to stay as administrators in tune with those things so that as this situation continues to be ever changing, we can adapt. That goes back to having multiple plans so that as the circumstances change, we can adapt and have a plan or B or C or D or Z ready to implement based on those recommendations.
Yeah, thinking about end of the year, collecting materials is going to be something that you have to consider. What are you going to do with any of the uniforms that are still out or library books that are still checked out? Developing a plan for that is going to be very important.
Many of us have to think about transitioning our facility to summer use, and we're not going to be able necessarily to have the exact same procedures that we did to close out the school year as far as packing up the building and the classrooms is concerned. But depending on how your facility is used in the summer, we'll need to implement some sort of a soft close, get things organized, get things packed up enough that we can transition those facilities to summer school if we have that opportunity, or to church activities, camps, different things that maybe can still go on later in the summer.
And then, of course, planning for the fall.
That's a big one.
We're all focused on the here and now, but we got to be planning for the fall and what we're going to be doing. I know that's a concern with a lot of administrators. either through financial issues or has a parent really fallen in love with homeschooling their child? There's a lot of things to consider, and I know it weighs heavy on the hearts and minds of administrators. Considering the fee structure, do we need to waive an enrollment fee? What are we going to do? Some schools are concerned what happens if we have to develop a plan if school doesn't go back in the fall. There's so many things that still have to be thought through and planned, and hopefully you're using your time now to be able to accommodate those thoughts.
Mike, I imagine you've poked a lot of curiosity even with just those last couple of thoughts. So it's good to know that we've got a couple of webinar topics coming up on those as well.
Well, and I've appreciated, with the limited time we have, we've been able to touch on some things. And so even now, before we finish this webinar, as some of you have questions, feel free to put in your Q&A. Before Micah and Amy leave, they've been willing to address some of those questions. And I do want to thank them for not only just coming here with the experience that you've had, but taking the time to research, to look, to get ideas. What are some others doing, and sharing it. And I want to thank you, those of you who've attended, of taking the time. I know you're very focused on the schools and what you can do. And so for the next few minutes, we'll take some of those questions. If we're not able to address all your questions, like Micah said earlier, schools@abeka.com will be a great place for you to send and email any questions. You'll also receive an email probably within the next day that will also have that email address. But for now, let's go to some questions that some of our teachers and administrators might have. Okay, we have a master school teacher who says, as a master school, how should you monitor their screen time as far as what's too little or not enough? This may be referring to screen time in general, including their teaching as well as other times that they would normally have on screen, or simply is it making sure that they're watching the videos?
This may be one of our Abeka master schools who is using a lot of video in their school setting that have now transitioned to using it at home, and they're wondering how to keep track of each student and how much time they're spending watching their video lessons. I know I've wondered that about my own child who is at home right now, watching his video lessons, hopefully under the close watch of his grandparents, and being sure that he doesn't fast forward or mute and do what he wants to do when he's supposed to be doing video. I know there's some resources available to us. Generally, what they'll be able to see on that ProTeach dashboard, or perhaps the Master Schools dashboard, is a log of maybe not so much at lesson level, but definitely overall how many hours a student has spent watching history, how many hours a student has spent watching English, how many hours a student has spent watching the math class that they've been assigned. So there are some ways to document that. And if you have additional questions about that, reach out to our team at schools@abeka.com, and we can certainly help you with that.
Okay, and this is a number of people are asking the question, if they teach young students or if they teach kindergarten or first grade, what are some suggestions you have for them for assessments? A lot of their assessments may be oral, or even if they do have some written assessments with students that young, it's a little bit of a challenge.
I feel like those younger students and younger teachers are almost in the best position maybe of all of us because of it being oral, because we can still do that oral over the phone or through a Zoom call. And Cindy, I think that goes back to those visual resources that we're providing in conjunction with this webinar, because teachers can build PowerPoints with those visuals that'll allow them to assess some of the key concepts that we need to make sure these little ones are coming out of the year with, ready to progress to the next year.
Yeah, also part of the purpose of reducing the material that is being assessed is to allow teachers to interact with their students on a more consistent basis. I've heard a lot of stories about teachers being very stressed and burnt out from this whole experience. They're having to do things that they've never done before, and they don't know exactly how to assess, and they're trapped in the circle per se of, I have to get everything done. I would caution that teacher to, you're gonna have to think outside the box, and you're gonna have to let some things go. Focus on the core components and assess those. A spelling, for instance, if you want to call and give an oral spelling test, well, don't call out 15 words, maybe pick 3 in order to be able to assess that particular student. Because teachers are being pulled at both ends per se, especially if you have children at home that you're responsible for. You have them to worry about, but then you also have your students to worry about. So there's a lot of things to ponder and consider, and that's one of the main reasons assessments are going to have to be modified.
So administrators are going to play a huge role in putting teachers' minds at ease that you don't have to do everything. And I know we're going to spend a whole session talking about how administrators can interact with their faculty and their staff during this time, but I think we as administrators have to give that assurance, break teachers out of that mold of having to follow and every jot, every tittle, every single question.
And try to pair up a younger teacher, an inexperienced teacher with a veteran teacher. That veteran teacher can help them navigate what's the essentials, particularly if that teacher, the veteran teacher, has taught multiple levels, which often happens at a Christian school. And they teach first grade this year and then third grade next year. And over the course of their 25, 30 years, they have a very good understanding of the scope and sequence of the curriculum. So pairing them up can really help determine the essential assessment versus the additional extra things that you may not have time for.
Cindy, I had not thought at length about these poor first-year teachers. We always know that first-year teaching experience can be traumatic, and now this has been part of their first-year teaching experience. And as much as we've all learned from it, they're going to have a unique perspective to always look back on their first year of teaching. This is not normal, and hopefully we find
and we can be encouraged that we did not know this was coming, but the Lord did.
That's right.
And the Lord knew who would be first-year teachers this year. So if there are any first-year teachers that are watching, be encouraged that He knew, and He's never given you anything that you couldn't handle. And so the strengths, what you will gain as a teacher from this time, I think.
Imagine how strong they're going to be as second-year teachers because of all the ingenuity and the creativity.
We did have someone quickly asking, where can we get those 300 visuals that Abeka mentioned earlier? I'm going to flip ahead real quick on the screen here and see if I can show that to you.
And I think we're also following up with an email at the end of the webinar that's going to give you a link to this page, and you'll have that drop-down menu, and you'll be able to navigate those resources. There's about 30 to 50 images for each grade level, K4 through 6th grade, and then also different subject areas represented. So watch for that email. If not after the webinar today, definitely by tomorrow, you'll get that resource link and be able to access those images and share those with your teachers. We hope they'll be useful and just spark creativity. We know, like Ms. Howe, they're going to build their own little PowerPoint images to test things that go beyond just using Abeka visuals, but we hope they'll spark some interest, some creativity, and make it a little bit easier for your teachers to create amazing PowerPoint, Zoom opportunities to finish out the school year successfully.
And I know others have asked, is this webinar available to watch again? Yes, it's been recorded and we'll be able to place it. I think we've already had plans to place it on YouTube. And so there will be information coming of just a link or how you could access that and how you could find it. This person asked, would you recommend foregoing materials such as health and history, I think this is in elementary, to focus more attention on our core subjects, math, language, and reading?
Michael, let's both answer this one, because I'll say what I think and then you say what you think, and if we're differ on it, that's okay.
I think it is certainly appropriate to realign the time that is spent on certain subject content. It's important, obviously, for the students to get the entire scope of the education, but the courses that you're talking about are they're not contingent on a previous year. So thinking about math, for instance, there's a certain level of expectation for that student to reach in order for them to be capable of the material that's covered the next year. However, I will say this, part of Abeka's strength is the spiral learning approach that we take. So some of the things that they may miss at the end of this year due to the situation that we're enduring, they'll get it next year at the very beginning of the year. So it's really going to work out that way. I think I would certainly place emphasis on some of those core subject contents in order to be able to achieve. I don't think it would be appropriate to neglect the others, but in terms of time, I certainly would invest more time in the core courses.
I would echo that. Those were similar thoughts as well, that those skills-based subjects are going to be more important for pupil progression to the next grade level than perhaps more of the reading-based subjects like history and health. So perhaps the students spend the time finishing up reading the content in their textbook, not as much time assessing it, studying it, maybe not having to watch all of the normal video instruction of a 20 or 30-minute class, so that we can ensure that those skills-based subjects get the attention they need.
Yeah, some principals that I spoke with are planning on opening school up a week early for the following year, the next year, in order to be able to meet some of those needs that students may have because of the situation that we've had to endure. I think that would be a wise choice if possible. And it doesn't have to be a full day, maybe a half a day, just to kind of focus on some of those core subjects in order to give those students a good springboard into the next school year.
There's going to be a high level of remediation.
Yes.
And a varying level of remediation. Some students will have followed every single jot and tittle and just have kind of a normal summer break and be ready to go. Others are going to feel like they had a 5-month summer and need a little bit more assistance. So I love that idea of building 5 extra days into the school year. You may still start with lesson 1 on day 1, but now you've got this flex time to stop and spend more time when we get to a point where we see students are needing more help. It's a great idea.
Review. Just a quick, another person shared a similar question, but they were asking for high school, how can I teach history and literature for high school online? And I know those subjects are often very much discussion based too, and not just giving them the facts, but challenging them to think about it. So a lot of high school literature and history teachers that I've seen have been using Google Docs as a means for students to not only put their own responses to teacher questions, but also as a means of responding to their fellow students' responses. So Google Docs may be a good resource if you're doing some brief taping of yourself, teaching the lesson, and then challenging them with some questions. You might also, as Micah and Amy have talked about, maybe there may be some essay-like questions where the students record themselves answering, and they could also answer to each other. So again, probably emphasize the thinking about the content, keep it basic, but challenge them with some questions that they could think on.
I love the idea of videoing the response to an essay. Students dread essays as much as we dread grading them. And so the idea that they can record that response, they'll buy into that because of the technology, and then obviously we'll enjoy seeing our students.
Yeah, a lot of high school history teachers have found success with platforms that utilize discussion board type situations. If you've ever taken an online college course or higher ed course, that discussion board model has proven to be very beneficial, and it really helps develop the thinking skills. You're not looking for one-word answers. You're looking for an actual a few sentences or a paragraph as a response, and then classmates respond to the response. So they create this dialogue for thinking, and I think a history class particularly, or even a literature class, that could be very beneficial for the students.
We are outside the box, aren't we, of where we would have thought we would be, and it's not as uncomfortable or as scary or as detrimental as we thought it would be because of all the resources available to us.
Now, this is a question. Are we allowed to have our teachers do pre-recorded teaching videos and post them to YouTube for our students to access? Is there a copyright issue with Abeka if they're using Abeka resources?
I know a lot of teachers have reached out to the permissions team, the permissions department here at Abeka, to ask that question. I'm not sure it's a question that we can answer in this setting just because it varies so much depending on what the teacher is describing. And we have copyright permissions that we've had to secure from other permissions holders for some of our material. So sometimes that's a little bit more complex. But as far as a teacher just doing their general thing, teaching and utilizing the resources just the way the student would view them in the classroom, that has pretty much all been completely acceptable within this limited COVID-19 time, and with the understanding that we'll pull those resources back down later when they're no longer needed because of the circumstances. So reach out to us if you have a specific concern. You can again use that schools@abeka.com email address, and whoever is responding to those can route you to the right people. Thanks for being conscientious about that.
And I know we're wrapping up. We'll probably take another question or two, but even if we weren't able to answer some of these live, we'll still be able to come around and answer some of your questions. And certainly, as we said earlier, perhaps a question comes to mind that you didn't put here, email us at schools@abeka.com. But here's one, again, talking about privacy concerns. This principal is interested in adding a slideshow to a Facebook Live for the awards ceremony. He'd like to put the name of the award, the student, and a picture of the student. Should he be concerned with putting pictures and names of students online?
That's an excellent question. It's very important to be considerate of that. Many schools at the beginning of the year, they'll have a photo consent form that they'll include usually for the yearbook or even for school social media. If the language in that is very clear in the proper usage, that particular principal could use some of the material. That's one of the concerns I have. I really would shy away from using social media in terms of publicizing your students in an instructional setting, simply because let me be more specific. It's one thing if the school has a social media account, because that consent form covers that. The problem that we may run into, and actually there has been some legal concern about this, is if the teacher is posting to their personal account. That's where the dilemma comes in. So I would go back and look at your consent policy, and even if you don't have anything written in policy, it's something that you could even produce now and ask parents for consent at this point if they would be willing to do that. But there's other things that you have to consider. If you put music in the presentation, that it could easily get would violate some of Facebook's policy and other social media policies. So you got to be very careful when it comes to things like that. But I think if you'll be studious about the research and go through process of due diligence, I think it should answer that question specifically.
It is a valid concern we can't brush past. You've got to get comfortable, and again, that parent consent is key.
Now, this school did not allow their teachers to use Zoom due to some technology compromise issues. I know I saw in the news that there were some people that would try to hack into certain Zooms. So they use Loom, which is very similar, but she says a lot of teachers are hesitant to record interaction with students. What do you recommend?
Again, I think that goes back to what your constituency is comfortable with. And if you have a catch in your spirit about it, I wouldn't ignore that. Do what's best for your parents that you serve, the students that you serve. And I've probably overused the technology of Zoom even in conversation today, because that's what we're using to broadcast this webinar. It's not the only one. They could all have hacking concerns. So you've got to make a decision that you're most comfortable with and the families that you serve are most comfortable with.
Yeah, particularly the group of students that I would be most concerned about would be my elementary students, because they don't have the ability to use discernment as much. Well, some high school students don't either, but in terms of recording, in terms of interaction, the parental consent is very important. In fact, a lot of the elementary students, I would encourage parents to be there or present when you're interacting with their child. And that way it would give them a piece about what's being discussed, and also give a little bit of accountability when it comes to what's being presented. So I think there are a lot of concerns out there, but I also think that the legal system will use some common sense when it comes to these types of things. Again, I can't guarantee that, but it's just one of those things that this is a developing situation. But I think if you'll cover your bases and achieve the parental consent, I think that will cover a lot of the concern that many administrators and teachers have.
Now, here's another question. We may not be able to answer it fully or completely, but we were talking about earlier adjusting the way we do grades, maybe pass fail, doing some adjustments with those. With some of our master schools that are accredited through Abeka Academy, will they be getting some information later on about some possible adjustments?
You know, I think that again is going to vary so much by the school. So reach out to Abeka Academy, reach out to the accredited team, and just express whatever the uniqueness is in your particular situation, because your students are already accustomed to learning by video. They've probably had to make less of a transition, even though it has continued at home. And different ones of you might have had different parameters in place. Some mentioned having parents sign a slip, each day, or maybe you've provided with ProTeach the video manual, and parents have signed at the bottom of each lesson that they have been the on-site teacher, that they have moderated that instruction, that they have supervised that assessment. There's going to be some variance there. So let's reach out to Abeka Academy's accredited team, the people that you would normally reach out to with any questions about your account, and let's get some clarification from Abeka Academy.
This teacher asked, do you have customized database for Christian schools to monitor activities and tuition fees? I know that even within the last couple of weeks, and there'll certainly be more information on it in the next couple of days, but our marketing team is putting together some tools, some resources for schools that are thinking of the fall and knowing that we're probably going to face some economic uphill battles with enrollment, but continue to be accessing that resource page, and I think you'll find some more advertising marketing helps there for you to use for this coming school year.
And continue asking those questions so our team will know what your specific needs and desires are, and we can continue to hone the resources that we provide to meet those needs.
We're offering them a lot of digital material, a lot of digital resources. Is there a time limit on their ability to access, like those 300 images that
Sure.
we're giving for their teachers to use? Do they need to access it within the next week or month?
We'll have to meet with our team to see exactly how long that web page will be available. Now, obviously, once they've downloaded those resources, they are free to continue using those. And if your teachers enjoy using those digitally, Abeka needs to know that so that we can invest resources in creating additional digital teaching aids in the lower grades for the future. But as far as the availability, we'll at least keep that web page up through the end of the COVID pandemic circumstances. And again, once teachers have downloaded those are theirs to keep and to continue using. And let us know if you enjoy it so we can add to them in the future.
And we squeezed in a couple of extra questions, and so I think we can still fit in a few more. This anonymous attendee asked, can I use the Abeka remote platform on Google Slide? How can I access this information?
I don't know that I'm familiar with the platform, so I'm not sure exactly how to address that specific question. So go ahead and email us at schools@abeka.com with that question and let us understand a little bit more on what that platform is and how you're wanting to dovetail Abeka's resources with the platform.
And you've probably gotten some feedback from teachers here, and I know you've been able to respond to them. This is a teacher whose students were familiar with the third grade videos, but they were still using the old third grade textbooks, and so the new third grade videos coincide with the new revisions.
Sure.
Is there any?
So schools have probably already figured out what to do there. If you didn't purchase the new third grade materials this year, I imagine most of those third grade teachers in that situation have probably been recording their own instruction and been doing it in that way. I know with the intermediate math for grade 7, we were able to provide videos to finish out the school year with ProTeach for the new intermediate math 7. But with that older product line for third grade, it would be continuing to do what you've been doing, which is probably your teacher providing video instruction of their own.
And someone asks, how can I share this information with my colleague? Again, all of you who registered, who attended this webinar, will be receiving an email address tomorrow, and that will contain a link as well as the email address, schools@abeka.com, to ask further questions. But that link should take you to this recorded video on YouTube, and you can send that to colleagues, and in case they might find this information helpful as well. And so I think that brings us to the end. We'll still be addressing some of these questions after the webinar, and keep sending those questions to us. But thank you, Micah. Thank you, Amy, for taking your time. And those of you who are still with us, thank you for taking your time. And we just pray that you find the end of this school year, although very different than what you expected, still one that you can still end successfully, and you can still give God the glory for it. And you can continue to sign up for more webinars on Abeka Front Office. So we have a number of webinars in the next couple weeks that will focus on different topics that you might also be able to gain some ideas and helps from. So look into those, and we trust that we'll see some of you again in the future. Thank you.